is mostly contributed to the obesity epidemic we have in this country. And then chapter 15, the diet soda delusion. So with that, let's welcome Miss Stacey Grimes.
Okay, thank you, Mozilla.
Stacey, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm going to share that since we have had the change of time, I don't know about everyone else, but I am still on the other time frame. And I'm an extra morning person now, and I wasn't a morning person. So now I get up like 2 hours, so I'm really off track. So then when night comes in, I'm like really tired because I go through the day and I'm just pushing through the day. So it's, so what I'm going to do is so I don't get dizzy, because I feel like I'm getting dizzy by looking at the screen. So I'm going to take away myself so I don't see myself and then go ahead and start. This was a really, really good chapter, these 2 chapters. And I'm so glad that it's only 2 today, because I don't know if I could have covered so much, but these 2 chapters for me were my favorite so far.
Wow.
Just because either these are some of the things that we deal with in life, either people around us or you know, we all have had sugar and we have sugar in our diet and we need to get rid of it. So I really, these were really beneficial chapters, and I had to go back and read them a couple times just to try to digest them. And I will say that I probably spent more time on chapter 14, which is the daily effects of fructose. And so just so that it's not so boring, I do want to just share a lot of the highlights, because this chapter wasn't like the other chapters where it gave a lot of studies. It was a lot of information, which was really good information. And so it started out by saying that sugar is fattening. And I know most of you all know that already. But just in case you didn't know, I'll point that out again. Sugar is fattening. And we sometimes are surprised by when we get products and they say it's a lot of sugar, but it says low calories. So then he talks about that more in this chapter, Dr. Fung. And so he starts out this chapter starting back in 1977, where there was a dietary guidelines for America's warning against the dangers of excessive dietary sugar. And people simply ignored it. And so sugar consumption rose, and it continued to climb from 77 to 2000, while obesity rates climbed as well. And so soon after that, 10 years later, they say diabetes, which should be no surprise, it started to rise too. The numbers started to rise with that disease. And so then he posed the question, is sugar toxic? And he says that one of the worst things that was introduced into our diets were sugary drinks. And that was the name of, went by sodas. And so the soda industry took off and did very well. And per capita, those numbers doubled in the 1970s. And I'll give this example because we've talked about in the past chapters how big businesses, they gave so much attention to sugary, drinks. And so back then, that's when you had some of the best commercials, for Coca-Cola and all these other, Sprite and all these other, drinks that we're familiar with, Mr. Pibb and all those drinks that we have probably fond memories with stars. So they sensationalized them. And so that got a lot of attention, and then people followed that. So then he started with the timeline and talking about how, yes, sugar drinks started to double. And then he said by the 1980s, these same drinks, of course, were even more popular. Then he said by 1998, Americans were drinking 56 gallons per year. And so even in 2000, he pointed out that sugary drinks provided 22% of sugar found in the American diet compared to 16% in the 1970s. And that was about a 6% incline. So no other foods came close to this percentage in the Americans' diet than sugar did, and these sugary drinks. So thankfully, the sugary drinks started to decline from 2000 to 2003 to 2013. And therefore that was the consumption of those drinks dropped about 20% in the US. But next, we started having sweet teas after those weren't such a big, highlight. we started having sweet teas and other sports drinks. And that's when they, you know, they hit the stage and had taken off. And then 2014, Coca-Cola had a 9 whopping years of sales decline after that because of those sports drinks. So that was one thing, that positive thing that came out of those sports drinks, is that people started trying to look for something healthier, but it just wasn't the sports drinks. And those other healthy drinks that they started calling healthy, but really weren't. And so then people started to notice, well, people's waistlines are getting bigger, and people's health are starting to decline even more. And so then the concern came up, and so there were more studies done, and but the sugar pushers were still out there. They were in the United States and Europe, and then they were able to, since they couldn't do a lot, since it was on the decline over in the Western world, and then they went over to Asia, and they started increasing their sales over there. And that's when, you know, they started talking about what Dr. Fung pointed out, that diabetes became a catastrophe amongst Chinese adults. That was when in 2013, they said that they had an increase of 11.6% of Chinese adults having type 2 diabetes. And that was a result of these sugary drinks and adding so much refined sugar into their diet. And so let me move on. So then we started to see, they also started to point out that never before in the Chinese culture had they had a generation where they had, never before had they had a generation that had diabetes. And so they said that this was like 1160% rise amongst the newer generation compared to the older generations in the form of diabetes disease. And so then they went on more, Dr. Fung went on more to say that that sugar, refined sugar is particularly fattening, and it leads to type 2 diabetes. So, you know, he just pointed that out clearly, that if you didn't realize it before, it contributes to type 2 diabetes, which is something that is not passed on genetically. And you get it later, usually you get it later on in life. That's my understanding of it. And so then he says that daily consumption of sugar sweetened drinks can carry a high risk of weight gain, and increases the risk of developing diabetes by 83% to drinking less than 1 sweet drink per month. So he was saying that if you have those sugar drinks in your diet, you know, every single day, compared to just once a month, you can lead to 83% chance of, you know, getting diabetes. And so he says, is sugar the culprit, or is it calories? And, you know, in previous chapters, we've talked about calorie reduction, reducing your calories, and that can help you reduce weight and, you know, of course, help you not become obese and not have other diseases that come from it. So he pointed out that there's no other food group that they have found that have a significant relationship to diabetes than sugar. And they said that diabetes correlates with sugar, not calories. And so he pointed out, why is sugar so fattening? He says that, you know, what people don't really understand is that sugar has zero, zero can have empty calories. So people think that when they see all these processed products, that, oh, they're low in calories, but it's more harm than it is helpful if you're just looking at calories. And so so he pointed out again that sugar is a highly refined carb, and it stimulates the production of insulin, which causes weight gain. And that is also found in rice and potatoes. So so then he moves on at the end of the chapter, and he suggests to everyone, he tells everyone, what can we do? And he says that we can remove all added sugars from your diet. And I mean, you want to, in order to avoid weight gain, remove the sugars from your diet and don't replace them with artificial sweeteners. Also, he pointed out that, as we all know, that that this has now become a concern. And so now we do have the Centers for Disease that are looking at studies, and they are, you know, working on trying to have diets come forth that will slow the rates of what was inclining of type 2 diabetes in our within the Americans. So then chapter 15 was really a lot more was a lot more technical, and then it went over a lot of the history, and it was entitled the diet soda. And so with this chapter, he just basically said that, you know, artificial sweeteners are not good for us, period. And I mean, a lot of people have, you know, used to put forth using diet as, you know, using diet products, and they say, well, that's good, but those are artificial sweeteners, and those are sweeteners that are infused in our foods today. They help prolong the life of shelf life foods. They help with the browning of our foods. They do many things that that I think I skipped over, and I want to highlight that because that was really important. It helps foods, those foods that are processed with high fructose corn syrup. They help them mix easily. Again, they extend the shelf life. They keep the bread soft, and they keep them from being freezer burn, and they're sweeter than glucose. So it just points out that all of those things that are added to our foods, they're just those added sweeteners are not what we want. And so if we can steer away from those, we can stay healthy. And it's just really important to understand that in these two chapters, if you don't read, well, especially chapter 15, if you don't read any other chapter before we get back, I really highly suggest that chapter 15, because I learned a lot about the difference between all of the different sugars, fructose, glucose, and sucrose. And fructose comes from your fruit, and glucose is, I believe I'm saying it correctly, Moselle, I think that glucose is what we have in our bodies.
Yeah, the conversion of carbohydrates into glucose.
Okay, and sucrose is table sugar, and table sugar gets mixed with fructose, which then they take it and they use it to make different types of sweeteners and artificial things. And then that combined together is not a good combination, right?
Yes, okay. Yes, because the body doesn't recognize it.
Yes.
As a natural food.
That's right. So I'll end with that. Like I say, if you don't do anything else, chapter 15 is really good. It's even worth passing on to somebody and saying, hey, read this, because when you start to understand how all these things, all of these products enter our bodies and what damage they do, and just how they even had a study where they were saying how they gave a group of people some Kool-Aid, and they gave it to them over, I think it was like over an 8-week period of time, a short period of time. And over that time, those people developed the potential to have diabetes just that quick when they gave it to them on a consistent basis. So it does not take long eating sugary items to become pre-diabetic. And then they say, of course, over a long period of time, now you can easily see how one can become diabetic if they continue to have all these sugars and artificial foods in their diet.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's give her a hand, everybody.